What happens when the most arrogant man in the city tells the wrong woman she's poor? John Thorne, a high-flying CEO, breezes into a 5-star restaurant, all set to close a shady deal. He orders a $5,000 bottle of wine and laughs right in his waitress's face, telling her, "You can't afford this." But he's just made a fatal mistake. He has no idea who she is, what she's doing there, or that his entire world is about to be shattered into a million little pieces. Because that waitress is about to pay his $8,000 bill with his own company card. This is the story of how one invisible woman took down an empire built on lies. The ache in Lara Vance's feet was a dull, persistent throb, a constant metronome counting down each excruciating minute of her shift. For the past 3 weeks, this had been her new reality, a stark contrast to the life she once knew. The pain was a relatively new sensation. Before this, the worst her feet had endured was a pair of ridiculously expensive and equally uncomfortable Christian Louboutin heels at a charity gala she'd been practically forced to attend. Now, the thin, worn-out soles of her regulation black, sensible shoes felt like little more than flimsy cardboard separating her from the unforgiving, cold marble floor of Lorinary. Lorinary was far more than just a restaurant. It was a theatrical experience, a stage for the city's elite, perched high on the 64th floor of a downtown skyscraper. Its floor-to-ceiling windows provided a breathtaking, almost godlike view of the glittering city below. The clientele was a potent cocktail of old money, new tech tycoons, and the kind of political power that didn't need to shout to be heard. The very air itself was thick with the aroma of aged wine, the subtle mist of atomized truffle oil, and the faintest, cleanest scent of beeswax from the daily polishing of the mahogany furniture. Era, or Ella, as her name tag read, was, to put it mildly, a terrible waitress. She was clumsy, not disastrously so, but her movements were hesitant, lacking the fluid, balletic grace of the career servers, men and women who could effortlessly weave through a crowded dining room, holding a tray of champagne flutes aloft without a single quiver. Her mind, usually so sharp and decisive in every other area of her life, seemed to short-circuit when faced with the bewildering array of 8 different types of forks. Ella, Table 4 needs water. Table 9 is signaling for the check, and your station is a mess, snapped Maria, the restaurant's general manager, her voice tight with barely suppressed exasperation. Maria was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin tautly over her cheekbones. She ran Lorinary with the ruthless efficiency of a military-grade stopwatch. She was also the only person in the entire building, aside from the 2 men posing as busboys, who knew Era's real name and true identity. "Yes, Maria." "Sorry, Maria," Era muttered, grabbing a heavy silver water pitcher. As she moved toward Table 4, she kept her head down, her eyes constantly scanning the room. This was the true purpose behind her carefully cultivated clumsiness. People tended to ignore the help, especially the clumsy ones. They dismissed her, and in that dismissal, they became careless, revealing things they wouldn't otherwise. Hidden away in her small, nondescript apartment, a world away from the sprawling Vance family estate in Connecticut, was a notebook. It was already half full of meticulously recorded observations. Tuesday, 7:15 p.m. JT met with 2 lawyers from Harrison and Inspector. Topic: Asset mobilization. Mentioned liquidating the Chicago property. Wednesday, 1:30 p.m. JT lunch with Morgan Cole. JT ordered the $400 Neptune Seafood Tower. Cole is a sycophant. Laughed at all JT's jokes. Topic: Project Cerberus. JT said, "The old woman will never see it coming." Friday, 8 p.m. JT with an unknown woman, not his wife, paid with personal card. The old woman that Thorne so casually dismissed was her grandmother, Annalise Vance, the formidable matriarch of Vance Sterling Holdings, a sprawling, century-old conglomerate with interests in real estate, shipping, and sustainable technology. And John Thorne, or JT, was the golden boy CEO they had hired 2 years ago to supposedly rocket the legacy company into the modern age. Instead, he was systematically liquidating it from the inside out, piece by piece. Ella carefully filled the water glasses at table 4, her hand shaking just enough to appear nervous. The couple didn't even bother to look up from their intense conversation. "Thank you, dear," the woman murmured absently, completely engrossed in her companion's story. Invisible. That was the goal. She returned to her station, refolding napkins with painstaking, awkward slowness. Her thoughts drifted from the throbbing ache in her feet to the dull ache in her heart. She hadn't wanted this. She held an MBA from Wharton and a master's degree in forensic accounting. She was supposed to be running the company's new green tech acquisitions fund, shaping the future. But 6 months ago, at the quarterly board meeting, the numbers had felt wrong, deeply, unsettlingly wrong. Profits were down, significantly down, but executive expenditures were up a staggering 300%. Thorne had smoothly explained it away as aggressive client acquisition and restructuring costs, painting a picture of necessary investments for long-term growth. The older board members, easily charmed by his silver tongue and impressive presentations full of industry buzzwords, had nodded along in agreement. But Era and her grandmother, Annalise, had seen the truth lurking beneath the surface. The numbers didn't just feel wrong. They were wrong. They were a carefully constructed lie. Thorne was a parasite, slowly hollowing out the company her great-grandfather had painstakingly built from the ground up, brick by brick. He was smart, though she had to give him that. He used proxies, shell companies, and encrypted servers, burying his tracks deep within layers of obfuscation. The company's internal auditors, the ones firmly on his payroll, conveniently found nothing amiss. So, Era had proposed a different kind of audit, a more personal and far more risky approach. "He's an egomaniac," Era had told her grandmother in the quiet sanctuary of the family's library, the scent of old leather and beeswax polish hanging in the air. "He needs an audience, and his favorite stage is Lorinary. He loves to be seen there. That restaurant," Annalise had said, a rare frown creasing her usually serene face. "My husband, your grandfather, bought that building back in 1988. It's one of our best assets, and Thorne is trying to sell it, under the table, to a shell company based in the Cayman Islands for a fraction of its true value. Maria, the manager, has been with us for 30 years. She'll help me. I know she will." And so Ella, the clumsy waitress, was born. She had gathered 3 weeks of invaluable data, but she was still missing the final, crucial piece, the smoking gun that would definitively expose Thorne's treachery. She needed to hear Thorne explicitly connect Project Cerberus to a specific illegal action or a known adversary, something concrete she could take to the authorities. Tonight, according to a calendar invite her team had decrypted, was the night it would all come together. Thorne was scheduled to meet with SR at 8 p.m. sharp. The hostess's voice crackled faintly in Era's hidden earpiece. "Mr. Thorne's party is ascending." Era wiped her damp palms nervously on her apron. Maria caught her eye from across the room, gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement, and then pointed in a clear direction. "Ella, you're on table 12, the VIP section." "Me?" Era said, her voice betraying a genuine squeak of panic. "Maria, I always spill things." "I know," Maria said, her face remaining impassive, revealing nothing of her thoughts. "That's exactly why you're perfect. They won't even see you coming." Era took a deep, steadying breath. The dull ache in her feet momentarily disappeared, replaced by the cold, sharp thrill of the hunt, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The show was about to begin, and she had a leading role to play. The elevator doors opened with a soft, expensive whoosh, a sound that spoke of privilege and exclusivity. John Thorne didn't simply walk into a room. He conquered it, radiating an aura of self-assuredness and entitlement. He was a tall, imposing man, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored Zegna suit the color of a midnight sky, the fabric subtly catching the light with every movement. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly coiffed, not a single strand out of place, and on his wrist, a Patek Philippe Nautilus gleamed, a casual $100,000 signal of his considerable status and wealth. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had clearly never been told no in his life, and who wouldn't have listened even if he had. He was flanked by 2 men. The first, Era recognized instantly. Morgan Cole, Thorne's vice president of special projects. Cole was young, handsome in a bland, forgettable way, and his eyes constantly darted around the room, perpetually seeking approval and validation from his superior. He was the quintessential professional yes-man, eager to please and terrified of displeasing. The second man was new to her, an unknown element in the equation. He was older, heavier set, with a thick neck and a face that looked as if it had been painstakingly carved from granite, all sharp angles and unyielding lines. He wore a suit that was just as undoubtedly expensive as Thorne's, but it lacked the same effortless style and flair. He radiated a cold, heavy silence, a palpable sense of contained power that was both intimidating and unsettling. This had to be SR, the mysterious figure she had been waiting for. "John, my friend, this place is high class," the second man said, his voice a low rumble with a distinct Eastern European accent that hinted at a complex and possibly dangerous past. "Only the best for you, Sergei," Thorne boomed, clapping the man jovially on the back, a gesture that seemed almost forced. "Sergei Rostov, gentlemen, the future of... well, let's just say the future is looking very bright." Era's blood ran cold, a sudden wave of dread washing over her. Sergei Rostov, not just a potential partner, not just another business acquaintance. Rostov was the notorious CEO of Rostov Global, a ruthlessly efficient logistics firm based in Cyprus, a company known for its aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. Vance Sterling Holdings was currently locked in a $50 million lawsuit with Rostov Global in Singapore over a breached shipping contract, a legal battle that had been dragging on for months and costing the company a fortune in legal fees. Meeting with him, especially in secret, was a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty, a betrayal of the trust placed in him as CEO. Entertaining him on the company's dime, using corporate funds to wine and dine a legal adversary, would be quite simply fraud, plain and simple. This is it, she thought, her mind racing. This is the moment we've been waiting for. Maria smoothly led them to table 12, the best in the house, a semicircular booth nestled in a private alcove overlooking the dazzling cityscape. "Your server Ella will be taking care of you," Maria said, her voice smooth and professional, betraying no hint of the tension that was palpable in the air. Thorne didn't even bother to look at Era. He waved a dismissive hand, his attention already focused on Rostov. Fine. Just champagne, the Dom Perignon, and the full caviar service, the Imperial Beluga, lots of it. And make it snappy." "Right away, Mr. Thorne," Era murmured, keeping her eyes lowered, feigning subservience. She hurried towards the bar, her mind racing to process the implications of everything she had just heard. Rostov. His meeting with Rostov. This was bigger than she had even imagined. As she placed the drink order with the bartender, her fingers subtly tapped out a coded message on the side of her leg, a prearranged signal to the two busboys who were actually ex-Mossad security agents on her grandmother's private payroll, discreetly informing them that the primary target was confirmed and in place. When she returned to the table with the elaborate caviar service, a 3-tiered crystal server piled high with ice, blinis, and glistening black pearls that looked like tiny jewels, Thorne was already deep in salesman mode, laying out his plans with an almost reckless abandon. "And that's the beauty of Project Cerberus, Sergei," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "The board is asleep at the wheel. They're old, they're tired, they're just looking to collect their dividend checks. They don't bother to look at the how. They trust me implicitly." "And the old woman, Vance?" Rostov asked, scooping a generous mountain of caviar onto a blini, his eyes never leaving Thorne's face. "What about her? Does she suspect anything?" Thorne let out a short, ugly laugh, a sound that was devoid of humor and filled with arrogance. "Annalise? Please. She's a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era. She's too busy funding art galleries and saving whales to pay attention to the bottom line. She's completely lost the plot. By the time she realizes we've carved out all the profitable assets, Cerberus will be a standalone entity, and we'll be, well, let's just say we'll be very, very happy. Wealth beyond our wildest dreams." Era carefully placed a small mother-of-pearl spoon beside Thorne's plate, her movements deliberately slow and precise. Her hand was shaking, But this time it wasn't from nervousness. It was from pure, unadulterated rage, a burning fury that threatened to consume her. He was talking about her family, her legacy, everything she held dear, as if it were nothing more than a carcass to be picked clean, a prize to be plundered. "Careful, girl," Morgan Cole snapped, his eyes narrowing as he noticed her tremor. "Don't drop anything." "Sorry, sir," Era mumbled, averting her gaze. Thorne finally turned his attention to her. His eyes, a cold, piercing blue, raking over her appraisingly. He saw the cheap shoes, the ill-fitting polyester uniform that felt like a costume, the nervous flush on her cheeks that betrayed her discomfort. He saw a nobody, an insignificant servant, someone who was beneath his notice. "What's your name?" he asked, not out of genuine interest or politeness, but as a deliberate assertion of power, a way to remind her of her place in the social hierarchy. "Ella, sir. Ella Marie." "Well, Ella, try not to spill anything," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a very expensive suit, and I wouldn't want to have to deduct the cleaning bill from your meager wages." He turned back to Rostov, dismissing her as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Now, as for the Singapore problem, Era retreated from the table, her body humming with adrenaline, her senses on high alert. She had the players identified, she had the project name confirmed, she had the motive laid bare. She just needed the final, tangible link, the irrefutable evidence that would seal Thorne's fate. The champagne arrived, followed by a selection of exquisitely prepared appetizers. Era moved in and out of the conversation, a ghost in the background, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, and listening with laser-like focus. Thorne was now boasting openly about the legacy assets he was planning to leverage, the valuable properties and holdings he intended to steal. He was talking about the Chicago building, the shipping fleet, even Lorinary itself, the very place where they were sitting. "This building," Thorne said, gesturing expansively towards the window with a dismissive wave of his hand, "is a gold mine, prime real estate in the heart of the city. But it's locked up in the Vance Heritage Fund, untouchable. Annalise is hopelessly sentimental, clinging to the past. She refuses to sell it." He paused, taking a sip of champagne, a predatory glint in his eyes. "So Cerberus is just going to absorb it. We've created a series of small, cascading debts against the property, nothing that would raise any red flags. In 3 months it'll default and the primary creditor, a shell company that I conveniently control, will seize it. Clean, simple, and perfectly legal on the surface." Rostov looked genuinely impressed, a rare flicker of admiration in his usually impassive expression. "And you, as the CEO, you can authorize all of this? No one will question your decisions." "I can authorize anything," Thorne said, his chest puffing out with self-importance, his ego clearly inflated by Rostov's approval. "I am the CEO after all. The buck stops with me." He then turned his attention to the wine list, a heavy, leather-bound tome filled with pages of vintage labels and exorbitant prices. "Now, for the real celebration," he said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Let's see what treasures you have hidden away in your cellar. Maria, what's the most expensive thing you have in the house? I want something truly special." Maria, who had been hovering nearby, seemingly appearing out of nowhere, stepped forward with the grace and efficiency of a seasoned professional. "That would be the Chateau Petrus 1982, sir. We have 1 bottle remaining, carefully cellared and in perfect condition." "How much?" Thorne asked, a glint of avarice in his eyes, his appetite clearly whetted by the promise of such an extravagant indulgence. $5,200, sir." Thorne grinned, a flash of pure, unadulterated greed illuminating his features. "We'll take it," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "This is a night for winners, gentlemen, and we deserve to celebrate in style. Nothing but the best for us." "An excellent choice, Mr. Thorne," Maria said, bowing her head slightly, her expression carefully neutral. She glanced almost imperceptibly at Era, conveying a silent message, a signal that the moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Era nodded subtly in response. This was it. The wine was the tangible, undeniable component of the fraud, the material representation of Thorne's corruption. It was an indefensible corporate expense, an extravagant indulgence that he would struggle to justify under any legitimate business purpose. This was the evidence she needed to bring him down. She walked purposefully to the sommelier station to retrieve the coveted bottle and its accompanying cradle, her heart hammering against her ribs, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through her veins. The Chateau Petrus was a legend, a wine whispered about in hushed tones by collectors and connoisseurs around the world. It rested regally in a velvet-lined mahogany cradle, protected from any sudden movements or temperature fluctuations. Its label was faded with age, a testament to its history and provenance, but its cork remained pristine, sealed with wax to preserve its precious contents. Era, whose hands had been meticulously trained in forensic accounting and financial analysis, not enology or wine service, felt a genuine wave of panic wash over her. This single bottle of wine was worth more than the beat-up car she had driven to work that night, a stark reminder of the sacrifices she had made to infiltrate Thorne's inner circle. She carefully wheeled the small service cart towards the table, her movements as smooth and deliberate as she could manage under the circumstances. Thorne and his guests fell silent, their attention now completely focused on the approaching bottle, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and reverence. This was the ritual, the moment of truth, the culmination of a carefully orchestrated performance. "Mr. Thorne," Era began, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to project confidence. "The 1982 Chateau Petrus, as you requested." Yes, just open it already," Thorne said impatiently, waving his hand dismissively. "We're not getting any younger here." Era's hands fumbled slightly with the corkscrew, the unfamiliar tool feeling alien and complex in her grip. She managed to get the worm into the cork, but it was slightly off-center, not perfectly aligned. She tried to correct it, adjusting her grip and applying gentle pressure. "Breathe, Era, breathe," she told herself, trying to calm her racing heart. "You've decrypted a Swiss bank's firewall, you've unraveled complex financial schemes, you can certainly open a simple bottle of wine." She began to pull slowly and steadily, applying even pressure to the corkscrew. The old cork was fragile and dried out, weakened by decades of aging. It squeaked in protest, a high-pitched whine that seemed to amplify in the otherwise silent room. She pulled harder, her face flushing with exertion, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the corkscrew tightly. Squeak, creak, rumble star. A tiny, dusty piece of the cork's edge broke off and fell onto the pristine white tablecloth, landing unceremoniously near Thorne's $2,000 cufflink, a small but significant imperfection in the otherwise flawless scene. The table went dead silent, the air thick with tension. Morgan Cole winced visibly, anticipating Thorne's displeasure. Sergei Rostov raised a single bushy eyebrow, his expression unreadable. John Thorne stared intently at the small fleck of cork, his gaze unwavering. He didn't move for a full 5 seconds, his face a mask of controlled fury. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his head, and a look of utter contemptuous disbelief spread across his features, a look that could kill. He didn't shout, he didn't rant, he didn't even raise his voice. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of ridicule that was far more chilling than any outburst of anger. "My God!" he chuckled, looking at his guests with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "Can you believe this? They let this amateur handle an 82 Petrus? It's an insult." He turned his cold blue eyes on Era, piercing her with their intensity. She froze, her hands still gripping the corkscrew, paralyzed by his contempt. "Honey," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "Do you have any idea what you're touching? This single bottle of wine, costs more than your entire year's salary. It costs more than that rundown apartment you probably live in. Probably costs more than any dream you've ever had." Era's face burned with shame and humiliation. She felt the eyes of the entire VIP section on her, judging her, dissecting her, reveling in her public embarrassment. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It just what?" Thorne leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sneer, his breath hot and unpleasant on her face. "It just proves that you've never held anything valuable in your life. Have you? You're a clumsy little nothing, a complete and utter failure. Your background noise, irrelevant, insignificant." He gestured around the opulent room, taking in the sparkling chandeliers, the breathtaking skyline, the other diners in their designer clothes, all symbols of wealth and privilege that were so far beyond her reach. "This," he said, his voice laced with disdain, "is our world, a world of elegance, sophistication, and unlimited resources. It's a world you just get to serve, nothing more. You're in a place where you simply do not belong. You are in a world you can't even begin to afford." He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "Get out," he commanded, his voice cold and imperious. "Get out of my sight. Send the sommelier. Send someone who actually knows what they're doing, someone who appreciates the finer things in life." The full force of her pathetic humiliation, hot and total, washed over her, threatening to drown her in its suffocating weight. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, demanding retribution. The Vance in her, the heiress to a vast fortune, wanted to pick up the $5,200 bottle of wine and dump it unceremoniously in his lap, soaking his expensive suit and shattering his carefully constructed facade of invincibility. The Vance in her wanted to tell him that her run-down apartment was actually a luxurious penthouse in the financial district, overlooking the very city he thought he controlled, and that her dream was to see him wearing a prison orange jumpsuit, stripped of his power and his wealth, reduced to nothing. But the auditor in her, the meticulously trained forensic accountant, the strategic planner, just smiled, a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of amusement that barely registered on her face. She didn't smile with her mouth, which remained fixed in an expression of contrite apology. She smiled with her eyes, a brief, cold flash of triumph that only he could see. She held his gaze for one brief, chilling second, and in that second, she didn't just see him. She analyzed him, dissecting his weaknesses and vulnerabilities with surgical precision. She saw his bank codes, the hidden pathways to his illicit wealth. She saw his encrypted files, the secrets he desperately tried to protect. She saw his downfall inevitable and imminent. He had just given her the perfect opening, the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to turn his arrogance and his contempt against him. "Yes, sir," Ella whispered, her voice thick with fake tears and feigned remorse, her performance worthy of an Oscar. "Right away, sir. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again." She turned and fled, not towards the sommelier, as he had instructed, but straight to the back-of-house service station, where Maria was waiting, her face etched with concern. "He's a monster," Maria hissed, her dark eyes flashing with indignation. "He's a complete and utter animal." "He's a fool," Era corrected, her composure returning instantly, the mask of subservience falling away to reveal the steely resolve beneath. She wiped the crocodile tears from her face with a dismissive gesture. "He's arrogant, blinded by his own ego, and he's entertaining a known legal adversary, flaunting his corruption in public. He's done. Finished." "So what now?" Maria asked, her voice filled with anticipation. "What's the next move?" Era looked directly at the main point of sale, POS terminal, her mind already several steps ahead, calculating the angles and planning her next attack. "Now he pays the bill," she said, her voice hardening with determination. "And he's going to pay it in a way he'll never forget." To understand what happened next, you have to understand that Era Vance wasn't just an angry granddaughter seeking revenge for her family's legacy. She was a weapon, carefully honed and precisely calibrated. And for the last 6 months, her grandmother, Annalise Vance, had been meticulously aiming her straight at John Thorne, preparing her for this very moment. The scene in the Vance Sterling boardroom flashed in Era's mind as she stood in the service alley, the memory as vivid as if it were happening in that very moment. It had been a cold, rainy day in April, the kind of day that seemed to seep into your bones and chill you from the inside out. The 20 board members, mostly men in their 60s with decades of experience in the corporate world, sat around a massive table of polished obsidian, their faces grim and skeptical. The numbers are stable, Annalise. One of them, a man named Henderson, had argued, his voice filled with forced optimism. John's restructuring plan is aggressive, yes, but it's exactly what we need to stay competitive in today's market. We need to embrace change, not resist it. Annalise Vance, small and elegant at the head of the table, her presence commanding despite her diminutive stature, had simply placed her teacup carefully back into its saucer, the movement deliberate and precise. The soft click of porcelain on porcelain echoed in the otherwise silent room, sounding louder than a gunshot. "Mr. Henderson," she had said, her voice quiet and clear, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "You are confusing activity with achievement. Our debt load has tripled in the last year. Our core assets are being leveraged against nothing, against vague development projects that exist only on paper. John is a magician, I'll grant you that. He's showing you a grand illusion with one hand while he robs you blind with the other." Then she had turned to Era, her eyes filled with unwavering trust and confidence. "Era, present your findings to the board. Show them what you've discovered." For 20 minutes, Era had laid it all out, presenting her meticulous research and her carefully constructed analysis. She didn't have irrefutable proof, not yet, but she had patterns, disturbing inconsistencies that painted a clear picture of deception. She had a digital breadcrumb trail, a series of subtle clues that led directly to Thorne's hidden agenda. She showed them how Thorne had systematically bypassed the standard procurement protocols, approving inflated invoices and awarding contracts to a series of newly formed consulting firms that all trace back to a single P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, a notorious haven for tax evasion and money laundering. P.O. box that Era had, through 3 sleepless nights of relentless coding and digital sleuthing, painstakingly linked to Thorne's former college roommate, a man with a long and colorful history of shady business dealings. "He's building a shadow company, ladies and gentlemen," Era had concluded, her voice firm and unwavering despite the skepticism she could sense in the room. "He's taking our assets, our contracts, and our capital, and he's moving them into an entity that he alone controls. He's calling it Project Cerberus, after the 3-headed dog that guards the gates of the underworld. He's building a 3-headed dog to guard the gates of his new stolen kingdom, and he's using our own money to do it." The board was stunned into silence, the gravity of Era's accusations sinking in. Annalise had chosen her moment perfectly, knowing that the seeds of doubt had been sown and would begin to take root. Now was the time to make her move. "We cannot go to the SEC," the matriarch had stated, her voice resolute. "Not yet. A public scandal would shatter shareholder confidence, sending our stock plummeting and destroying the company we've spent generations building. We would be the ones who lose while John walks away with his stolen billions, leaving us to pick up the pieces. This must be handled internally, discreetly, surgically. We cannot afford to tip our hand." That's when Era had proposed her audacious plan, the seemingly reckless gamble that would put her directly in the line of fire. "He's an egomaniac," she had reiterated, her voice filled with conviction. "He loves to boast, to show off his wealth and his power. And he does it at Lorinary, our restaurant, where he knows he'll be seen by all the right people. Let me go in, not as a board member, not as an auditor, but as a waitress. I'll get the proof we need, the irrefutable evidence that will expose him for what he is." It had been a wild, desperate gamble, a high-stakes risk that could easily backfire. But Annalise had seen the genius in it, the element of surprise and the potential for gaining invaluable inside information. She had recognized the unwavering determination in her granddaughter's eyes, the fierce loyalty and the burning desire to protect the family's legacy. "Approved," she'd said, her voice firm and resolute. "But understand this, Era. This plan is far more complex than just wearing an apron and serving cocktails. This is a full-scale operation, and you will have all the resources you need to succeed." And she had meant it. For the past 3 weeks, Era hadn't just been Ella, the clumsy waitress. She had been the hub of a massive internal investigation, a complex network of surveillance and counterintelligence. The two busboys, David and Hayes, were her security detail, highly trained professionals with extensive experience in covert operations. Maria was her on-site coordinator, managing the logistics of the operation and providing invaluable support. And in a high-tech surveillance van discreetly parked in the loading bay 64 floors below, a three-person team from Vance Sterling's Risk Management Division, a polite name for their in-house counterintelligence unit, was meticulously listening to every word, recording every conversation, and analyzing every piece of data. The earpiece Era wore was custom-molded to fit perfectly in her ear, virtually undetectable, and voice-activated, allowing her to communicate discreetly with her team. The small lost button on her apron was actually a high-resolution camera, capturing every detail of her interactions with Thorne and his associates. Most importantly, Era had been working closely with the company's bank, Amalgamated Trust, enlisting the help of a trusted ally within the institution. Mr. Thorne's corporate founder's card has unlimited swipe authority. The bank VP, a longtime Vance loyalist who owed his career to Annalise, had explained, his voice tinged with a mixture of concern and apprehension. He can buy a car, a boat, a building, anything he wants without triggering any automatic alerts. We can't stop him from spending the money. I don't want you to stop him, Era had agreed, her voice calm but firm. But you can flag it, can't you? I want a ghost flag on the account, something that won't be visible to Thorne or his people. I want to be alerted of every single transaction, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. And I want, she had continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a hypothetical, of course, the ability to trigger a temporary decline on his other credit cards, just for, say, 30 seconds or so, long enough to cause a slight glitch, a momentary inconvenience. The VP had been visibly nervous, his brow furrowed with concern. Miss Vance, that's manipulating the system. It's highly irregular, and it could have serious repercussions. Mr. Thorne, Era had countered, her voice sharp and unwavering, is actively stealing from the system, defrauding our company and betraying the trust that has been placed in him. Who are you more afraid of, him or my grandmother? The VP had reluctantly agreed to help, understanding that his loyalty to the Vance family outweighed the potential risks involved. So, as Era stood in the service alley, composing herself and preparing to face Thorne again, she wasn't just a humiliated waitress. She was a general, a strategist, a master manipulator, with all of her pieces perfectly in place, ready to execute the final phase of her carefully orchestrated plan. Thorne's insult hadn't been a defeat. It had been a tactical error, a miscalculation that had revealed his arrogance and his contempt. He had shown his hand, confirming his true character and his underlying motives. And he had just ordered a $5,200 bottle of wine to illegally woo a litigation adversary, right after bragging about a plan to fraudulently seize a company asset. It was, as Era thought to herself, a perfect day at the office. She nodded subtly to Maria, conveying her instructions. The sommelier can open the wine, she said, her voice calm and controlled. But tell him to be slow, methodical. I need to make a quick phone call, and then I need you to print table 12's bill immediately. But they haven't ordered dessert, Maria protested, her brow furrowed with concern. They haven't even finished their appetizers. They're done, Era said, her voice hardening with determination. Mr. Thorne just doesn't know it yet. He's about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. Era stepped into the dry storage room, the familiar scent of dried herbs and burlap sacks surrounding her, a comforting reminder of the simple things in life. She pressed the side of her earpiece, activating the communication channel. Departed. Competence. It's a beautiful thing. Era moved toward the table, her head bowed in what appeared to be deference. She placed the leather folio gently on the table next to John Thorne. Sir, she whispered, projecting an aura of fear and submission. Your bill. Thorne looked at her, clearly annoyed. We're not finished here. We're having dessert. I know, sir, Era stammered, attempting to appear flustered. But Maria, my manager, she said, given the price of the wine, she said we needed to pre-authorize the payment restaurant policy for a party of this size. This was a complete fabrication, of course. Lorne had no such policy, and Era had fabricated the entire situation. Thorne's eyes narrowed, a sign of his rising suspicion. Pre-authorize? Are you accusing me of not being able to pay? No, sir. Never, Era said, taking a step back, feigning fear. It's just, after I spilled, she said. Thorne's anger was now palpable, radiating from him like heat. He was being questioned, his authority challenged, however weakly, in front of Rostov. He let out a long-suffering sigh, a theatrical display of exasperation. This is what I get for dining in my own company's properties. Incompetence. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim alligator skin wallet, and flashed a brilliant gold-plated American Express card, an ostentatious display of wealth. He tossed it onto the table with a flourish. Fine, run it and add a 20% tip, even for this disaster of service. Now get out of my sight and send us a dessert menu. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Era snatched the card and walked, not ran, to the main POS terminal near the bar, maintaining the illusion of deference. Maria was there, pretending to polish glasses, but her eyes were fixed on Era. He took the bait, Era murmured, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. She swiped the card and pressed the side of her earpiece, activating the next stage of her plan. Now, Ben, now. She waited, counting silently. 1 second, 2, 3. The machine whirred, and then a harsh, digital beep echoed through the restaurant. Declined. Code 5. Do not honor. Era's blood sang with triumph. Maria, she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, amplifying the drama. That's strange. What is it, Ella? Maria asked, playing her part beautifully, feigning concern. Mr. Thorne's card. It was declined. The whispers started instantly, a low murmur spreading through the dining room as the other patrons picked up on the unfolding scene. Era, holding the card by its very edge as if it were contaminated, walked back to the table. This was the longest walk of her life, each step measured and deliberate. Every eye was on her, dissecting her every movement, anticipating the confrontation. Thorne was mid-sip of the Petrus, completely unaware of the impending disaster. What is it now? Era was shaking, but this time it was with pure, unadulterated joy, a feeling she had been anticipating for weeks. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice cracking slightly, as if overcome with nerves. I am so sorry. It was declined, sir. Thorne choked, sputtering in surprise. A fine spray of $5,000 wine misted the tablecloth, adding to the surreal atmosphere. What? He roared, his voice booming through the restaurant. The entire restaurant was now silent, every conversation ceasing abruptly. It said, "Do not honor, sir," Era whispered, holding out the card, offering him the physical evidence of his humiliation. That's impossible, Thorne boomed, his face turning a truly magnificent shade of crimson, a visible manifestation of his rage and embarrassment. That's an unlimited balance card. Run it again. You flimsy little idiot. You probably ran it wrong. I did, sir. 3 times, Era replied, maintaining her facade of innocence and incompetence. Thorne's fury was now visibly being replaced by a cold, creeping panic. His ego, his reputation, his power, all of it was evaporating in front of Sergei Rostov, a man who respected only strength and success. This is ridiculous, Thorne snarled, trying to regain control of the situation. He fumbled for his wallet again, his hands trembling slightly. My banker will be fired. You will all be fired. Here. He threw down a platinum Visa card onto the table with a dismissive gesture. Try this one. Era took the card and walked back to the terminal, repeating the performance. Swiped. Waited. Beep. Declined. C14. Invalid account. This time, she didn't even have to say anything. The beep was loud enough, the sound of his financial ruin echoing through the room. She walked back, her face a mask of terror, perfectly portraying the innocent waitress caught in the crossfire of a financial disaster. Sir Thorne was now visibly hyperventilating, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. His personal wealth was tied up in the very shell companies he was using to defraud Vance Sterling, a precarious house of cards about to collapse. Era knew from her audit that he was leveraged to the hilt, his personal accounts probably in reality dangerously low. The glitch, the seemingly random technical error, had just made the truth visible for all to see. "This is a system error," he hissed, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. Morgan Cole looked like he was about to be sick, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. Rostov was watching Thorne, his face cold and assessing, calculating the implications of this public display of financial instability. The deal was dying right here at this table, the promise of future profit dissolving before his eyes. I don't know what to do, sir," Era said, the perfect picture of helplessness, exploiting his desperation. "Here," Thorne shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. He ripped his wallet open, his hand shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He fumbled past 2 more useless cards and finally his fingers closed on his last resort. It was a heavy, matte black card made of anodized metal, a symbol of ultimate power and access. The Vance Sterling Holdings founder's card, the one with truly no limit, the one tied directly to the company's main treasury. He threw it at her, a desperate gamble. It skittered across the floor and landed by her feet, a stark contrast to its intended impact. "Use it!" he spat, his voice a low, dangerous growl, a barely suppressed threat. "And if this doesn't work, I will personally buy this building and have it torn down with you inside." Era bent down, deliberately slow, and picked up the card, the founder's card, the symbol of her family's legacy. Her great-grandfather's signature was laser-etched in the corner, a constant reminder of her heritage and her mission. She looked at Thorne, her eyes full of tears, a convincing display of feigned vulnerability. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. Right away." She walked back to the terminal, her steps measured and deliberate, each movement calculated to maximize the tension. She didn't tap her earpiece. She didn't need to. Ben had already released the holds, allowing the final card to go through, setting the stage for the final act. She swiped the heavy black card. The machine whirred, and then a soft, pleasant ding signaled its approval. "Approved." Tot. The receipt printed, a long white tongue of victory emerging from the machine. Era tore it off, the sound echoing in the silent restaurant. She took the leather folio, placed the black corporate card inside, and laid the merchant copy of the receipt on top, carefully arranging the evidence of his impending downfall. She walked back to the table, her steps confident and purposeful. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware and the hushed breathing of the onlookers. She placed the folio in the center of the table, a visual centerpiece of his destruction. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice no longer whispering, no longer feigning fear. It was clear, confident, and resonant with authority. It went through. John Thorne let out a shaky breath, the color slowly returning to his face as the immediate crisis was averted. He was still the king, or so he thought, his reign momentarily restored. He snatched a pen from his pocket, opened the folio to sign the receipt, and froze, his hands suspended in midair. He stared at the receipt, his eyes widening in disbelief and dawning horror. Vance Sterling Holdings. ACCT 8450222. Status: approved. He looked up from the receipt, his eyes narrowing in confusion, his mind struggling to process the information. He looked at Era for the first time, really looked at her, seeing her not as a waitress, but as something else entirely. He saw that her clumsy posture was gone, replaced by a confident stance. She was standing tall, her shoulders back, her chin up, radiating an aura of quiet power. Her eyes, which he had mistaken for frightened and subservient, were now glowing with a cold, intelligent fire. The cheap polyester uniform suddenly looked like armor, a symbol of her hidden strength. "You," he whispered, his brain slowly, painfully putting the pieces together, like a jigsaw puzzle revealing a horrifying image. "You used the corporate card. You told me to, sir," Era said, her voice crisp and professional, devoid of any trace of her earlier feigned nervousness. "But my personal cards. Why did they—" He trailed off, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He saw the faint, triumphant smile playing on her lips, the subtle confirmation of his suspicions. He realized it was a setup, an elaborate and meticulously planned trap. "Who?" he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, the sound barely audible. "The hell are you?" Era reached up and untied the knot of her apron, the simple act carrying a powerful symbolic weight. She pulled it off, folded it neatly, and placed it on the edge of the table, discarding her disguise and revealing her true identity. Then she reached into the small pocket of her black trousers and pulled out a slim, elegant business card case, a silent declaration of her authority. She slid one card across the table to Thorn, a visual representation of his downfall. He didn't touch it, too stunned to react. She slid one to a very pale Morgan Cole, whose face was now the color of chalk. She slid one to a very, very still Sergei Rostov, who remained motionless, observing the scene with detached interest. Thorn looked down at the card, his eyes fixated on the embossed lettering. The card was heavy cream-colored stock with the embossed Vance Sterling logo. Era K. Vance, Senior Partner, Forensic Audit, Vance Sterling Holdings. Board of Directors. Thorn's blood didn't just drain from his face. It seemed to evaporate, leaving him ashen and trembling. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, the specter of his past actions returning to haunt him. "Vance," he stammered, barely able to form the word. "Analyze granddaughter," Era supplied, completing his sentence. "And the lead investigator of Project Cerberus Internal Audit. We've been monitoring your activities for 6 months. John." Morgan Cole made a small, strangled sound, a desperate attempt to suppress his rising panic. Rostov's eyes, however, flickered with something new, something unexpected. Not fear, but respect. He was watching a predator he hadn't seen, an apex predator, and he admired the skill and precision of the kill. "I've been working here for 3 weeks, John," Era continued, her voice resonating with pure, cold authority, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "I've listened to you plan the fraudulent liquidation of our Chicago property. I've listened to you plot to steal this very building from my family's heritage fund. And tonight I've had the distinct pleasure of watching you try to impress Mr. Rostov." She turned to Rostov, acknowledging his presence for the first time. "Mr. Rostov, a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure our legal team in Singapore will be thrilled to learn that the CEO of Vance Sterling has been entertaining you, our primary litigation adversary, on the company's dime. This single meal constitutes a material breach of fiduciary duty, gross negligence, and, of course, wire fraud." She tapped the $8,450 receipt, highlighting the evidence of his wrongdoing. "This is our Exhibit A. You see, John, you just used company funds to bribe an adversary, and you did it right in front of the lead auditor. That's just sloppy." Thorn's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, his voice failing him in the face of his impending doom. "Project Cerberus," Era said, her voice sharp and decisive, signaling the end of his reign, "is dissolved as of, 45 minutes ago. While you were enjoying your wine, my team at headquarters, acting on my authorization, was executing a full data seizure from your office. Your servers are locked. Your accounts are frozen. Everything you stole has been routed back to the Vance Sterling General Fund." You can't," Thorn finally gasped, finding his voice, but his words were weak and unconvincing. This is illegal. You can't just, security, get this liar out of here," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation and fear. He half stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, a futile attempt to regain control of the situation. The entire dining room was watching, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. That won't be necessary, Mr. Thorne, a calm voice said, cutting through the tension. Maria, the manager, stepped forward, assuming her role as an agent of Vance Sterling. She was flanked by the two busboys, David and Hayes, who had undergone a remarkable transformation. They were no longer wearing busboy jackets, but crisp, dark suits, and they looked very large, projecting an aura of quiet authority. Mr. Thorne, Maria said, her voice firm and unwavering. I am the general manager of this restaurant, a property of Vance Sterling Holdings, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your security access has been revoked. You were in on this? Thorne shrieked at Maria. Betrayal and disbelief etched on his face. Maria's family has been with my family for 30 years, John, Era said gently, a hint of pity in her voice. Loyalty is a funny thing. You should try it sometime. This is, I'll sue you all, Thorne sputtered, his threats sounding increasingly hollow and desperate. You won't, said Hayes, one of the security men, his voice deep and final, brooking no argument. Mr. Thorne, if you'll come with us, we have a car waiting to take you, not home, to our legal department. They have some questions. And then I believe the SEC has some questions. And after that, the district attorney. John Thorne's collapse was not a gentle deflation. It was a structural implosion, the complete and utter disintegration of his carefully constructed facade, the entire architecture of his arrogance, the steel framework of his ego that held his personality aloft, shattered and fell in on itself, leaving nothing but ruin. For a moment, his mind was pure white digital noise, a chaotic jumble of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He heard Era's words, but they didn't compute, his brain unable to process the enormity of his situation. Granddaughter, audit, fraud, exhibit A, the words swirled around him, meaningless fragments of a shattered reality. He stared, his mouth hanging open, at the heavy cream-colored card on the table, the symbol of his downfall. Era K. Vance. He had seen her before, not as a waitress, but as a ghost in the periphery of the boardroom. A quiet, mousy young woman in a sensible suit sitting behind her grandmother, typing on a laptop, easily overlooked and dismissed. He had dismissed her just as he had dismissed her tonight, seeing her as nothing more than a background object, a piece of furniture. And that object had just disemboweled him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. You, he finally whispered, the word a dry rattle in his throat, a testament to his shock and disbelief. His blood pressure, which had been a raging torrent of crimson fury moments before, plummeted, leaving him cold, clammy, and gray. The $5,200 wine in his mouth suddenly tasted like ash, a bitter symbol of his ruined fortunes. You can't. This is entrapment. This is illegal. Is it? Era's voice was no longer the soft, professional alto of a board member. It was the sharp, icy staccato of an executioner, delivering the final sentence. Is it entrapment to allow a man to expose his own criminal conspiracy? Is it illegal to record a CEO openly bragging about defrauding his own board? You did this to yourself, John. You were just too arrogant to see the audience. My lawyers? He began, a reflexive, pathetic threat, clinging to the last vestiges of his power. Your lawyers? Era almost smiled, a hint of amusement flickering across her lips. Your lawyers are from Harrison and Inspector, a firm that has been on retainer with Vance Sterling for 40 years. And Mr. Henderson from that firm is currently waiting in our legal department with the team from the SEC. They are eager to hear your side of the story. I believe they're particularly interested in Project Cerberus. The mention of the SEC was the final, fatal blow, the realization that this wasn't just a corporate ousting, but a criminal indictment, with potentially devastating consequences. This was prison. This was the end. Thorne turned, his eyes wild and desperate, searching for allies in the wreckage of his empire. Morgan, he gasped, reaching a trembling hand across the table. Morgan, tell her this is a misunderstanding. Our project, it was for the good of the company. Tell her. Morgan Cole had been frozen in a state of silent, abject panic, paralyzed by fear and self-preservation. He looked at Thorne's outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake, recoiling from the touch. He looked at Era's cold, appraising eyes, assessing his value, calculating his culpability. He looked at the two mountain-sized security men, David and Hayes, who stood impassive and implacable behind Maria, their presence a silent threat. Morgan saw his entire future, the penthouse, the Porsche, the stock options, evaporating before his eyes, dissolving into nothingness. And in that moment of pure, selfish terror, he made his choice, sacrificing his former ally to save his own skin. He physically recoiled from Thorne, pushing his own chair back so violently it almost toppled over, a desperate attempt to distance himself from the impending disaster. I don't know what he's talking about, Morgan shrieked, his voice cracking into a pubescent squeal, betraying his fear and desperation. He did it. It was all him. I'm a whistleblower. He fumbled inside his own suit jacket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Here, look. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, a preposterous prop in his pathetic performance. I was taking notes to expose him. I was going to bring this to you, Miss Vance. I swear. Project Cerberus, that was his name. I told him it was wrong. I told him it was illegal. But he threatened me. He threatened my family. It was a performance so pathetic, so transparently false that even the diners at the next table winced, embarrassed by his obvious lies. Era didn't even blink, her expression remaining impassive, unmoved by his desperate pleas. "Save it, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice laced with contempt, her disdain palpable. "Your digital signature is on the Cerberus wire transfer authorizations from a bank in the Caymans. Specifically, transfers dated May 14th, June 2nd, and August 19th, for a combined total of $22 million. You weren't gathering evidence. You are an active, and I must say enthusiastic, co-conspirator. You're just the first rat to try and chew his own leg off to escape the trap." She nodded at Hayes, signaling his fate. "He goes too. Put him in the second car." Morgan Cole's face crumpled, his carefully constructed facade of success and respectability dissolving into a mask of despair. He didn't just look defeated. He looked erased, his identity stripped away, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his actions. He slumped back into his chair and made a small, wheezing sound, his useless notebook falling to the floor, a symbolic representation of his shattered ambitions. Throughout this entire exchange, the third man, Sergei Rostov, had remained perfectly still, an unmoving observer in the midst of the chaos. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't panicked. He had simply watched, his granite-like features impassive, as if observing a particularly complex and bloody chess match, calculating the odds and assessing the players. Now he slowly, deliberately stood up, his movements measured and precise. He carefully brushed a non-existent crumb from the lapel of his expensive, if tasteless, suit, maintaining his composure even in the face of such dramatic upheaval. He looked at the chaos, at the two broken executives, and then fixed his cold, gray eyes on Era, acknowledging her power and authority. "Miss Vance," he said, his Eastern European accent turning her name into a hard, percussive sound, emphasizing his respect and admiration. "A remarkable performance, truly." He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a heavy platinum card case, a symbol of his own wealth and influence. He slid a card onto the table, not near Thorne or Cole, but directly in front of Era, offering her a gesture of respect and acknowledging her victory. "My business with him," he nodded at Thorne with a look of profound disgust, "is, of course, concluded. Rostov Global does not suffer fools. And this," he gestured at the scene, encompassing the wreckage of Thorne's career and reputation, "is a fool's opera." He picked up his own untouched glass of the 1982 Petrus, the symbol of his discerning taste and refined palate. He raised it, not to his lips, but in a toast to her, acknowledging her intelligence and skill. "This wine, it is wasted on a man who drinks it only for the price. But you, Miss Vance, you understand its value. It seems my lawsuit in Singapore will be much more difficult now," he added, acknowledging the challenge she presented. "Don't count on winning, Mr. Rostov," Era said, meeting his gaze, her eyes unwavering. The fight with Thorne was over, but the war with Rostov was just beginning. A new challenge on the horizon. A rare, cold smile touched Rostov's lips, a hint of anticipation in his expression. "I look forward to it. Good evening." He turned without a backward glance at the men he had been plotting with, his former allies now discarded and irrelevant. He was a shark, and having sensed the blood of his former allies, he was simply swimming away to hunt another day, seeking new opportunities and exploiting new vulnerabilities. He respected power, and he had just seen a masterclass in its application, a display of skill and precision that had impressed even him. His departure was the signal, the definitive end to the evening's drama. The play was over, the curtain had fallen, and the audience was left to contemplate the performance they had just witnessed. "John Thorne," Era said, her voice now flat and devoid of all emotion, the final judgment delivered. "You're done." David and Hayes stepped forward, their movements precise and coordinated. They didn't grab. They didn't rush. They moved with a slow, mechanical efficiency that was far more terrifying than aggression, a silent demonstration of their power and control. Each man took one of Thorne's arms, their large hands closing around his biceps, a firm and inescapable grip. "Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice a calm, deep baritone, conveying an air of quiet authority. "If you'll come with us, we have a car waiting to take you to our legal department. They and some gentlemen from the Securities and Exchange Commission have some questions." The physical contact snapped Thorne out of his stupor, jolting him back to reality. A final, primal burst of narcissistic rage surged through him, a desperate attempt to reclaim his lost control. He was a cornered animal, lashing out in a futile attempt to escape his fate. "No!" he roared, trying to rip his arms from their grasp, but his struggles were useless. It was like pulling against granite, their grip unyielding and unbreakable. "You can't do this. This is my restaurant. I am the CEO. Security, get your hands off me." He tried to plant his feet, but his expensive, leather-soled shoes slid on the polished marble, offering him no purchase. He was half lifted from his chair, his struggles becoming increasingly desperate and undignified. The entire dining room, a sea of silent, wealthy faces, was watching, their eyes fixed on his humiliation. They were watching the king in his Zegna suit being hauled away like a common drunk, his authority stripped away, his reputation in tatters. The humiliation was absolute, a public spectacle of his downfall. As they dragged him past the table, his eyes wild and bloodshot, locked onto Era, the source of his destruction. He was being destroyed, and she was just standing there watching, impassive and unmoved by his suffering. All his rage, all his fear, all his humiliation focused into one last, spiteful projectile, a desperate attempt to inflict some damage before he was silenced. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice cracking with bitterness and rage. "You think you're so smart? You're still just a waitress, a lying, conniving little nothing. You're a child in your grandfather's house. My lawyers, they'll tear you apart." He was at the edge of the VIP section now, his heels dragging on the floor, his struggles becoming weaker and more futile. He twisted his neck, his face a mask of purple fury, distorted by rage and despair. He screamed, defaulting to the only insult he had left, the one he believed was the ultimate truth, the one that would expose her weakness and vulnerability. "You can't afford this," he bellowed, gesturing wildly with his head at the opulent room, the lavish decor, the $5,000 bill, the half-drunk bottle of Petrus, the symbols of wealth and power that he believed defined him. "You can't afford any of this." His words echoed in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the restaurant, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud, a final, desperate attempt to wound her. Era didn't move, remaining perfectly still. She let his words hang in the air, allowing them to be absorbed by every diner in the room. She let every patron absorb his final, desperate thesis, his assertion that she was an imposter, an outsider who didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. Then she cocked her head, as if genuinely considering his statement, weighing the truth of his words. She looked at the table, surveying the scene. She saw the bill, the record of his extravagance. She saw the heavy black founder's card, the symbol of her family's legacy and his failed attempt to exploit it. And next to it, she saw the single, crumpled $20 bill he had tossed onto the table an eternity ago. The tip, the pittance he had thrown at Ella for her disaster of service, a final act of contempt. Slowly, deliberately, she walked back to the table, her movements precise and measured, each step amplified by the silence of the room. Her footsteps were the only sound, a rhythmic cadence marking his impending doom. She reached down and picked up the $20 bill, her fingers brushing against the cheap paper. She smoothed it out between her fingers, her movements precise and calm, displaying an almost clinical detachment. She turned and walked toward Thorne, who was now struggling weakly between his two captors, his resistance fading as the reality of his situation sank in. They parted for her, allowing her to stand directly in front of the man who had, just an hour ago, laughed in her face, confident in his superiority. She held his gaze, her eyes unwavering, piercing through his arrogance and exposing his vulnerability. Her eyes were not angry. They were not triumphant. They were just empty, devoid of any emotion. She was an auditor and his account was closed, his life as he knew it over. "You're right about one thing, John," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the silent room, ensuring that everyone heard her final words. "I can't afford this." She held up the black founder's card, displaying the symbol of her family's wealth and power. "My company can. My family's legacy can. A legacy you tried to burn to the ground to warm your own hands." She took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at her, to acknowledge her victory. Then she lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, a private, final insult just for him, a gesture of personal contempt. "You, however," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "are going to be somewhere where a card like this is just a piece of plastic, and you're going to need this." With a movement as precise as a surgeon's, she tucked the smoothed-out $20 bill into the breast pocket of his $10,000 Zegna suit, a final act of humiliation. "I hear the coffee in a downtown holding cell is terrible," she whispered, her words laced with irony. "And it's not free." John Thorne let out a sound, a noise that was not a word, but a strangled, wounded animal noise of pure psychic agony, the sound of a man broken beyond repair. That simple, crumpled $20 bill was the ultimate symbol of his fall, a tangible reminder of his ruin. It was the final, perfect humiliation, reducing him to nothing more than a charity case. "No," he whimpered, his voice barely audible, a plea for mercy. "Please, take him away," Era said, her voice flat and emotionless, dismissing him as if he were a piece of trash. David and Hayes didn't hesitate, their movements efficient and unwavering. They turned and dragged him out of the main dining room, his protests fading into whimpers. The last anyone saw of John Thorne was the flash of his expensive shoes as he was hustled toward the elevator. His reign of terror over. The doors opened, revealing the cold, unyielding metal of the elevator car. He was forced inside, his body limp and defeated. The doors slid shut, cutting off his final, pathetic wail, silencing him completely. He was gone, disappearing into the darkness. For a full 10 seconds, the restaurant was absolutely silent, every patron stunned by the abrupt and dramatic conclusion to the evening's events. The tension finally broke, releasing the pent-up energy. A few tables over, an older gentleman in a tuxedo raised his glass in a silent toast to Era, acknowledging her victory. Someone else actually spontaneously clapped, a gesture of appreciation for her performance and a recognition of her triumph. Era Vance stood alone, the adrenaline that had been pounding through her for 3 hours suddenly vanishing, leaving a deep, profound exhaustion in its wake. And for the first time, the ache in her feet, the dull throb that had been her constant companion for 3 weeks, returned with a vengeance, reminding her of the physical toll of her undercover operation. Maria came up beside her, her usual stern expression gone, replaced by a look of fierce pride and emotional relief, a testament to her loyalty and admiration. She was holding a single glass of water, not a standard restaurant-issue glass, but a heavy, sparkling baccarat crystal tumbler from the bar's top shelf, a gesture of respect and recognition. "Well done, Miss Vance," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just well done. Your grandmother is on my private line. She's, well, pleased would be an understatement." Era took the glass and drank the water in one long, grateful gulp, quenching her thirst and momentarily easing her exhaustion. "In a minute, Maria. Tell her I need a minute." She looked at the table, the scene of the evening's drama. She saw the half-finished bottle of 1982 Chateau Petrus, the symbol of Thorne's extravagance and Rostov's discerning taste. The 2 glasses, one for Thorne, one for Rostov, were still full, untouched by the men who had sought to exploit her family's legacy. On an impulse, she picked up her own clean glass, the one she'd almost dropped in her initial performance, and poured a small 2-ounce measure, indulging in a moment of quiet reflection. She swirled the deep red liquid, watching it catch the light of the chandeliers, appreciating its beauty and complexity. This was the bottle he had used to insult her, to belittle her, to reinforce his perceived superiority. This was the wine her grandfather, the founder of the company, had purchased and cellared in this building. The building he loved, the building Thorne had sought to steal. She looked out the window at the city, her city, sparkling below like a carpet of diamonds, a testament to her family's success and her own commitment to protecting their legacy. "He was right, you know," she murmured almost to herself. "Mom?" Maria asked, clearly bewildered. "John, he was right," she acknowledged. "I really can't afford this." She lifted the wine glass, taking a small, almost worshipful sip. The wine was simply incredible, a symphony of flavors. Complex notes of tobacco and dark berries danced on her tongue, with subtle undertones of dust and time. Tasted like a journey through time itself. "I really can't," she repeated, a slow, weary, but deeply contented smile gradually spreading across her face. "But Maria," she continued, her eyes twinkling. "The look on his face when I handed him that $20 bill, that, my dear, was absolutely priceless." And just like that, the self-proclaimed king was knocked off his high horse. Not by a powerful army or a grand conspiracy, but by one seemingly insignificant woman he was arrogant enough to dismiss. John Thorne learned a valuable lesson that day, and he learned it the hard way. Never underestimate or look down on the people who serve you. You might just be talking to the person who holds the keys to the whole kingdom. What did you all think of Era's master plan? Did you see that twist coming? Or were you as surprised as John Thorne? Let me know in the comments what your favorite moment of the story was. Was it the satisfying scene with the declined credit card? Or was it that final, symbolic $20 bill she offered him for his morning coffee? If you enjoyed this story of sweet justice and well-deserved revenge, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a good, uplifting story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, real-life dramas every single week. Thank you so much for listening.